So it should just be seeing my workspace. So I want to put some water on here first of all, but I don't want to absolutely flood it. I want a kind of cluster of colours kind of up in this corner here, and then maybe some down here. And I want to get some drips to happen because hopefully they're going to form sort of like stem shapes and sort of things. So I'm going to start with my large sort of 1-inch square brush. And I'm just going to sort of create an area of wetness sort of up this top corner here. So it doesn't have to be anything precise. I'm just going to do a kind of cloud of water on the surface sort of around this sort of area. I'm using quite a fine paper. It's not got a lot of texture, this paper, so it's going to be quite got quite a slick surface, so we'll see how that works out. And then I've got another section of kind of wet down here, so I've got two areas, sort of a small bottom left area and a larger kind of top right kind of cluster of water. And I'm going to start with some nice hot pink somewhere sort of around here. So again, quite watery to begin with. I'm going to try, I want to get quite an intense colour, but I'm going to start off with, like you often do with watercolour, is some relatively watery, as the name would suggest, and not too much pigment, just so I can start getting a feel of where I'm going. So again, I'm just sort of dabbing onto the surface to create, I want a sort of splodge. It's a very artistic term, a large splodge of pink kind of in the middle. It's sort of like slightly to the top, upper middle kind of. And once I've got that in, then I want to get some, I want to try and think of a center, but I don't mind if it runs. I want to get some runs and some moves happening, as we know we like the way that happens. And that's what I'm hoping is happening, is I'll get a sort of something pouring down from the center of it. And then below that, I'm going to come in for a kind of orangey yellow. I want something with some real fire kind of coming in underneath it here. So I'm going to start off with the watery color, but then I really want to pack some color into that, working straight onto the surface in to get some nice bright. You may not have got the spring weather at all at the moment. It may feel more like March, but let's imagine that we're getting towards some heat and some warmth at last, at least in our painting, if not in reality. And then I want to bring these colors in again, sort of down in this corner. Again with the orange and then the pinky or the red kind of tone. And you know, you're totally free to use whichever colors appeal to you today, but I think we want something with, we're going to use some blues in amongst these as well, but I think we want to really get some hot sort of contrast. This one I've got sort of like a sort of orange center, and then I'm putting on the red sort of color around the outside to give that slightly two-tone kind of feel. So there we go. Just a bit more, bringing on that round. Right, so I've got sort of a nice sort of shape there. So I've got these sort of pinky tones. Let's go back and get some more pink onto this pink flower. I want a really strong sort of cerise kind of pink on that. I want to see a definition between the two shapes. I want to see them move, but I definitely want to see an edge that I'm going to work on later. And then I think I'm going to go for a paler pink, sort of around here, because I want to go into a purple on the far side. So I'm going to put another pink sort of space, but not a much lighter one. So more water, less paint, and perhaps just with a center that we can play around with later. So just give it a kind of center. It doesn't matter if it runs, because we'll work with what we've got. That's the lovely thing about it, is that we're just going to see what it gives us to play with later. And as this comes a bit drier, you can start to come back and maybe add some different areas in, just to sort of see what colors we can get going. And then up this sort of, as I come towards, oh, there's Caitlin. Sorry to let her in. Let me just catch her up quickly, so we can join on. Hello, Caitlin. Hello.
Hello. Sorry I'm late. I got caught in a bit of traffic on the way home.
Oh, it's you know, why can't they use a sort of an art light, like a police light, but like an art one, you know, saying, I need to do art, get out of my way. We're doing, we've got, let me just spotlight mine, people. We're doing something that has sort of based on a kind of floral kind of feel. So we've got a portrait piece of paper, a little bit of wet on, not too much, and we're doing some areas of really intense color. We want to get some really intense color that we're going to work on later. So you might need to have a hairdryer handy so that we can speed up the drying process.
Okay.
I am recording this, so if you want to just sort of jump in and maybe sort of play around with some of the bits that we do, and then you can always go back and revisit with the video if you want to see sort of where we started. But I literally just started with a lovely big splat of pink and then orange underneath it. And I want to get some of these drops to happen because they're going to become stems at the end of the in the composition. So I've done some pinks here with a lovely fiery orange and a fiery orange down here. You can see as it's drying, it's already getting quite pale. So once it's dried, I'm going to go back in, and I want this sort of like this to be like a center. So I've got an orangey center, and then I'm going in with the darker colors around. So as the paper gets a bit dry, you can go back with thicker paint and kind of really pile on some of that color and get it to stand out and get it to sort of be quite vibrant. I'm just going to add a few more compositionally. I'm thinking I'm sort of getting this sort of feel of this diagonal through here. So I want to take some orange up into, let me just tilt my camera a little bit. It does put it at a slight angle, but you can see sort of where the top is. I'll just move my light out of the way a bit.
Well, thank you for catching me up, and sorry to everyone.
Well, life happens. So I'm going to then try, I want to sort of thinking about the composition, I've got sort of a slight diagonal here. So I want to get a little bit of orange up here to kind of bring that sort of zigzag of color through the piece. If you think about kind of the shape that you're making, the shape that you want the eye to draw, all the red kind of colors and the orangey colors are going to be connected. They're going to link to each other. So they'll tend to, your eye will tend to fall to them first. So it's just saying, right, I want them to go up and then across into this sort of final shape up here. And so they're seeing all this detail. And you can, if you start to get interested in composition, it's surprising how you can create a lot of energy in a piece just by where you arrange things. And if you use something that has a diagonal or a kind of zigzag quality to it, it has more energy than something that's very flat or sort of very horizontally aligned. It's very even. Which is why landscape painting is traditionally quite a restful media or restful subject, because it is generally has this horizontal feel, and we tend to find that more restful than something that's very vertical. So I've got those sort of these sort of colours through here. You might need to have a hairdryer. I don't know if I said that, Caitlin, handy. Everyone else has been on sort of given that a bit of information just so that we can speed up the drying process when we need to. I'm just putting a little bit of extra red in around there because I feel that kind of like needs it. I've got a nice dribble that's happening here, so I hope you're getting some nice dribbles happening as well with some of these colours. And then want to put some cool tones through this here. And remember, cool tones are what we call recessive. They tend to be more background, they tend to be quieter. So they're a good foil to go against your hot red tones. So I'm going to use some green up here. Just to sort of, as if, you know, we've got either a green flower or a kind of bloom coming up here. It's quite pale at the moment, but let's still make it quite a definite green. I don't want to sort of pussyfoot around the green. I want it to definitely look quite strong. And I'm going to add in some yellow tone into that green to kind of give it some of that slightly more acidy, vibrant kind of colour. So I'm going to bring, I don't mind if they overlap. It's fine if they sort of mix together and get moved around. They're going to talk to each other on the paper, and then I'm going to bring it into a blue tone. So I've got bluey green more up in this kind of corner here. And composition is always just about thinking how the eye experiences the work when it looks at it for the first time. It's really what we're talking about, and just seeing if we can not exactly control but guide the viewer into looking. I mean, some of my work I get really into sort of this idea of creating really quite definite frames and things so that people have to actually interact with the work to see it. And it's sort of it's always quite gratifying when you see someone bending down to have to look at something, you know, because you feel they've committed, then they've, you know, you've made them change their posture, which you know, is quite pleasing. So I'm just bringing this background sort of bluey green area sort of through here, and then as we come down to we're going to get some different shades into here, and I want to bring this blue down into the, but I want to kind of do a place where the two colors are mixing. So we've got blues and greens up here, we've got the pinks up here. So this area, I want to do a kind of purpley lilac. I'm trying to think of the word then, I'm not trying to say a sort of purple color, because that's where blue and red kind of meet. When they meet together, they're purple, aren't they? So I'm going to bring some purple, just starting off as a blob. Very sort of scientific turn of phrase there, a blob. And just bring, oh, it looks quite, oh, it's funny, on my camera, it looks really blue, but it is actually purple. I hope that's going to come across. And add some real nice dark Cadbury sort of purple into that color, just to get that center quite nice and dark. So we've got something then that is sort of bridging the gap, as it were, between the red world and the sort of hot world and the cool world. And that's kind of how I'm using my colors, just in this sort of like composition. I'm just going to try drawing the curtain a tiny bit. I don't know if the sunlight is slightly bleaching out the colours. It may be cold, but we have actually got quite a lot of sun here. It's always such a difficult balancing act. Right, okay, so I've got this sort of explosion of colours. Again, we're nearly finished with applying the colour, because we're going to work much more on top of it. But as it's got quite dry now, I definitely want to try and get some of these stronger areas of colour. So where I've got paint and I can be a bit more controlled where it's drier, I can add in some sort of purpley red tones just into this edge here. I'm just using my brush on the side where this pink comes in here as well. I'm going to get quite a strong pigment again into these sort of, I want to get the center of these pink flowers really vibrant and full of strength and color, just to sort of build up in around there. I don't mind if they run. I like, we like little runs of color, and then just take in. So I just want to really get these colors beautiful and bright, and I'm going to get some more orange into this orangey section here. And don't worry at all at the moment about what the shapes are creating. We'll find all sorts of things in them when we come to look again. So at the moment, just get some color onto the page and sort of get them to get that intensity of tone that you, if you can, on there, and let them run, let them spread down to get a bit more orange up into this one, really sort of bring it up into life. And then I'm going to put a bit more turquoise, or sort of turquoise blue, up into this sort of corner around here, just to sort of add that in. And so this is where, if you've never tried painting with inks, do get yourself some, because I'm going to use a little bit of ink on this because I love it and I find it really, really satisfying to use. So just with a smaller brush, and if you haven't got inks, again, just use some really intense, try and get some really intense watercolor mixed up, so it's sort of like 50-50 almost, or more than that, almost quite dry paint, but just so we can try and introduce some explosions of the brighter. We want to get some real good colors going here, some really nice, bright, energetic colors. Let's put some of that blue into the purple. And you can start thinking about, because we're doing something that has a kind of floral kind of feel, you can start thinking about maybe creating kind of almost like spokes coming around the shape of these sort of brush marks. And I'm going to just grab some pink, and I want to get some pink ink, which is always a really satisfying thing to say, pink ink, into that feel. Oh, this is when the lid's a bit tight. I'm just going to get a bit more of bright pink into this pink flower in the center, just sort of really magenta, just using it, the ink quite neat. And if you can use your paint in the same way, try and start getting this sort of, think about the rays of the plant coming out from the center, just sort of quite simple brush marks, just to start to get that shape sort of developing. And then again on this one, just press the whole length of the brush shape in a dab. So you don't have to draw it along, but just sort of get that almost like a printing, finger painting kind of feel just coming through. So we're getting that rays out from the center, which gives you that feel of the way that the flowers are structured. I'm thinking about poppies. I paint them a lot because they're so insubstantial. You can't pick poppies. They, for the vase, they just fall apart the moment you pick them. So they have this sort of very momentary sort of glory, and they have such strong symbolism with the idea of remembrance and things like that. And I think it makes them really interesting subjects to draw. And of course, they have these fantastic dark and beautiful centres, which are really delicious. Right, so that's probably all the colour I'm going to add on to this now. So I'm going to do my bit of hair drying for about 2 minutes. So I'm going to mute, because you don't need to have my hair dryer magnified across the county. So I'm going to mute my thing. I'm just going to get my hair dry and give it 2 minutes and just trying to blow. And if you can even get some of your drips to blow upwards, that's really exciting to do as well. So let's all do a 5 minute or 2 minute maybe hair drying session. Okay. Right, so I'm stopping my hair dry there. I've got it quite nice and dry. So we can see sort of the overall shape that we've got here, with these sort of very, at the moment, quite chaotic sort of explosions of flour. But, you know, from chaos comes order. Now, as I said, what I'm going to be using is some pens that are, some of the pen I'm going to be using is going to relate to the colours of the flowers. Some of them are going to be the standard sort of black pens. Obviously, if you've only got black pens, it really won't be, it'll just be a slightly different feel. It won't be a bad piece of work. It won't go wrong or anything, because you should know art is never about right or wrong. It's just about what you're doing and feeling at that moment through expression. So I'm going to be using some red toned pen work on the red flowers, and some green and blues on the kind of green and blue ones, and then I'm going to be then building up some sort of background drawing of like stems and leaves kind of connected into it. So I'm going to focus in on this sort of section here, because I'd like to at least get one bit done in quite strong detail so that we can see how that would develop, and then we'll sort of spread out from there. So I'm going to zoom in. You get shots of my front room while I get my camera sorted out. Right, so there we go. So I'm going to be on this area here, so I can hopefully get the sort of detail that I want into here. So when you think about the poppy flowers, they have these sort of very dark centers, which sort of have this lovely sort of almost like an eye surrounded by thick eyelashes, that kind of feel to them. So for this sort of section in here, I want to use something to get, I'm going to use a dark pen here, or a black pen, to get the sort of dark, to sort of think about the shapes that I can turn here into like a center. And I'm going to bring the sort of veining lines out from here. So I've been given this shape here in the middle of my flower. So you've got to look and see what shapes you've got in there. But I think you'll be able to pick out something. It doesn't have to be round, but something that will start to kind of indicate the center of your flower head. So I can draw that kind of area here and say, right, that's where I'm basing my flower head on. So I want to make it look a little bit more round-ish, so I can then just draw another line to give that kind of round center. And then I can fill some detail in around here. I'm just using, again, simple kind of circle lines because they have those sort of like stamen, I suppose, aren't they? All the sort of little fringes of things. So you kind of just see the end of them sticking up. So I can put, and then some of them I can actually put onto like sort of curled lines kind of coming up to give it that kind of flowery kind of feel. I can do little half sort of petal shapes like that sort of coming round that have that kind of stamen like feel. But really it's just thinking about the circular shapes that I can put into that sort of central area, just in this sort of dark color. And again, I say it all the time and it sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but I want this to be darker, so I'm going to draw small shapes closely packed together, because the more pen you get onto your surface, the darker the effect is, because you're just literally putting more black onto the surface. So to get it darker, pack it in tightly and bring all that sort of into that sort of nice dark center. You don't want to color it in completely because you want to leave some hints of the color sort of coming through onto this sort of area. And then once I've got, you can always come back and add some more in, but I've got sort of established now my kind of central point of my flower. I can then come in, I'm going to start off by sort of seeing outlines. Poppies have these sort of large, very floppy kind of rather loose sort of petals. So they usually have about 4 or 5 kind of overlapping each other. So I'm going to start by going around the edge. I'm using a pink or purplish pen. You can use a black one if you only in blacks, or you could use a blue or something. But there's something nice about having a color that's connected to the underlay color for this. And so I'm starting just by finding a perimeter, I suppose, around my center, and just sort of saying, right, okay, so yeah, where I get that edge there between the blue and the pink, I'm going to claim that as this poppy's kind of petals, and I'm going to come round some of these sort of edges and just finding my way through them. I'm going to divide it up in a bit to create more kind of petal shapes, but I'm just coming round through around the edge of the poppy, just sort of seeing that shape in it. And if you get like some pale, really pale bits like this, I absolutely love those. I think, you know, sort of make the jump between the brush strokes and decide where you want the edge of this poppy to go, and just sort of come round so you've got this whole shape sort of defined. And then you do see kind of like separate shapes inside the sort of poppy. You see sort of maybe 3 or 4 petals, and they've usually got quite a sort of curve on them. So where you've got a line, I've got a nice line like here, so I can bring my line out to this sort of dribble of paint and come round and just decide that that's sort of one-ish kind of petal through here. And then maybe I'm going to see a line and then just decide that that's where I'm going to put the next one in, just to sort of bring that shape kind of coming out here. And then I think I'm going to take a line sort of around about here, bring that down, and they sort of overlap each other, so you sort of see different and that sort of comes up, it sort of creates different sort of areas of the poppy. And this one I'm going to bring it up through there and just come out to the edge there. So I've got roughly sort of 4-ish sort of sections happening on that sort of poppy head. And then thinking about how the lines are going to help us describe a surface. They're going to give us that kind of sense of veins, but they're also going to help describe my surface. So this dark center, I'm going to imagine, is curving in, and then when it gets the lighter, it's going to curve out. So to do that, I'm just going to do a line that kind of curves in like that. So it's a line that's pushing away from me, and then I'm going to bring it up onto the top and just follow it out sort of flatter. And then I can follow that line, and I'm going to keep on repeating that sort of pattern across. But where I get that sort of change of color, that's where I'm going to make my sort of bend happen. So I'm still looking at the paint that I've got. And again, your painting is going to be different because you're going to have different paint explosions and movements. But see if you can find a similar kind of pattern or rhythm to your paint as well. So that's definitely where it's going in. And then it's going to come down and round And it's just these lines are both giving me texture, and they're giving me definition as well. They're helping to show the form. So this one again, sloping kind of in, and then spread it out and up into that next section. Just kind of follow them through, and it starts to create a rhythm. And the closer you pack your lines, the closer they lie together, the darker kind of overall effect you're going to get. And this will look really lovely with black pen as much as it will look with color pen. It'll look different, but it'll look really nice, because the black will bring a really stark sort of linear quality to what you're drawing. So again, I can just work my way round, and the colored pen on the colored background is more subtle. So you kind of like maybe don't notice as much at first, but you get more of a kind of build up, and you see this sort of coming through, and it's more harmonious with the painting underneath. So this one, because it's above, and you think gravity would sort of be forcing the flower to kind of bulge out slightly. So these ones are going to slightly come forward and then up straight like that. And that's going to give that slightly different sort of change in direction for the lines below. And move those up and over the top and close together, some of them further apart, just to give a kind of different feel. And that's how I'm going to work this round. And you can see I'm just starting to give this a real kind of nice form and shape. It's starting to feel like it's a flower that's opening up. And so once you're happy with the direction of one line, you can kind of like just follow it with the others, and some of them can come closer together, some of them can spread apart more, and it starts to give it sort of texture. And with this section here, I'm going to bring the line kind of in again, so curving in, and then quick change and sort of bending out again, and you get that strong bend, and it'll give you that kind of creased feel that you get in poppies. And this is a really good, I mean, I love having time to go for the occasional walk in the countryside. I do occasionally manage it, but also just being out when you're walking around town and things. There's always a beautiful array of flowers in front gardens, and I'll spend all summer collecting images on my phone of just the structure of flowers and the way they fit together. And then when you want a bit of inspiration, you can go back and look through those and just sort of see how cleverly they're all kind of made, and you can kind of see how these lines help describe their sort of surfaces. So we've gone all the way around this sort of, and it's pulled out this from being like quite a sort of explosive soft blob. It's kind of pulled it into this sort of shape that becomes much more kind of recognizably a flower. And then so I'm going to move on to this sort of piece here. I'm going to see this as being as if it's like a leaf, a petal from a flower that's kind of tucked behind, that's sort of popping round the front of this one. So it's kind of like part of a flower. And I think having bits where they're not all just front on, they're all just sort of doing the same image, because they do tend to cluster together and overlap each other. I think it gives it a much more kind of real kind of feel. I've got a nice orange. Let's see how this pen works. It might not quite show up, but I want to try. This is an orange marker, but it's got quite a fine bullet point. So I think it's also, this one's running out slightly. Yes, it is. So that one's not going to work. So let me go for again, that one that goes into the not the bin, but the pen retirement home, the bottom drawer of my desk, because I just get sentimental. I don't like throwing them away. So I'm going to see if I can find one that's got a bit more life in it. Let's have a look at this one. Right, okay. So this is again an orangey red, but a sort of coral. But I mean, you can use packets of felt tips, because a lot of them have really quite fine points. So again, the first thing I'm doing is just sort of deciding where that edge is going to be, and deciding that bit is the edge for this leaf that's poking around. But yeah, I always urge people to go and look at the sort of children's packs of pens and art pens, because it's surprising. You can get such a huge range of colors and in kids sections, and it's always like like a quarter of the price of anything that's sold in an actual art shop, and they can work just as well. And I'm particularly fond of things like, that's just off the screen there, isn't it? Let me just tilt that camera a little bit. things like gel pens, because they have a really, they go on loads of different surfaces. They're very um, sort of like off-road in the sort of pen sense. You know, they're not frightened of drawing anything, but you get a lovely range of fantastic colours to play with, and they're just not priced as anywhere nearly as expensive as the kind of posh grown-up equivalent. You know, it's like kids always get the best stuff, don't they? And so I'm just going to bring, so I'm just using my lines on this one are going sort of out and across this section. So you might have a bit that can do something similar with, but this one you don't see the center because you imagine it's sort of tucked in behind this one. Then I've got this orange one on this side here. So let me just pull around a bit to there, and I can see, I think the center would be coming, I'm going to say roughly sort of around that sort of size there. So that side there rather. So I'm going to come back with my black pen and get a nice dark center. I haven't got a lot of paint to go for, but and this one I'm just going to decide that's where my center is, kind of poking out behind there, because I want to get some, where now I've got that edge of the sort of orange petal, I can get my dark shape to follow into that edge there, and it'll help to create the sort of sense of perspective in that center bit, because the black will be disappearing behind that orange and making it stand out a bit. So again, just filling it in with circles or kind of swirly shapes to kind of give that feel of the dark center of the poppy, and maybe just take a few kind of straggling out into that orange, because they sort of tend to overlap it, don't they? And sort of just where it's going under that petal there, just get in with the pen and work around it and just pull that in darker. So you get that nice sense of this lovely sort of dark eye poking behind the ones in front. And then I'm going to go onto a red pen for, because I want this sort of orangey color, but I want to have something again that's a slight contrast to it. This one might be too fine. I think it does work. This is a Sakura Micron. They do a small range of really fine pens in, this is a 0.05. So it's a very, very thin nib, but you don't get a big choice of colors. They tend to be larger in nib size, but this one is quite small. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to give that outline. And can you see where it's tucking around here? I don't want that falling away shape. So I'm just going to include that bit of white and then pop that behind. So that is now part of the poppy. So with this one, again, I've got a lovely line here to create as a petal. So I'm going to take that down and then continue that down into that section. I'm just going to ignore that spill. I still like it. It can just sit on the side like that. And then again, I think I might just create like a little, this bit is so nice. I'm going to define that as a kind of, this poppy has a strange level of extra petal that's just going to go in there. And then I've got this sort of line in here. So again, I'm going to use my lines, but red lines, and think about the shape that you're creating. So my left petal is coming out here, and then it's going to slide in and under there. And then, so I'm going to, once I get one in, I can copy that sort of flow. So it's doing the same sort of thing, keep them slightly wider apart at the edge of the petal. And as they come close to the center, they can get tighter together. And then that gives, again, more tone. Even if you're doing it in red pen, it starts to give it more kind of tone. And I can come over and in like that and sort of round. Remember, the tighter you get the lines, the more impact they sort of have, the darker they become. And so I can, and remember where this is overlapping here, they might have to go underneath the edge of the petals just to kind of help give that illusion that they're passing one under the other, that you've got some sort of perspective. And then as they come out here, I can swing them much wider apart here, hit that edge, and then bring them in tighter. So I can get round like a sort of fan shape round my corner, keeping that rhythm of vein work kind of coming through. And again, when you get close to it, and you can spend a long time sort of getting these lines in, the more you can sort of get in, the more it kind of gives these petals a sense of form and a sense of, and it makes them quite translucent in feel, doesn't it? So for this petal, I'm going to start with a line going across this way. I find if I start in the middle, then I work sort of either side, and I can sort of use this one as my guide. But yeah, it does sort of really give them this sort of like onion skin transparency, because they look like the way that the veins and the ribs of the petal stand out with the light coming through these translucent petals around them. And so again, I'm going to keep them close together near the center of the flower and let them fan out and move apart as they come towards the edge. So you get that fanning feel across the flower. And I hope this is starting to really make these look like flower heads out of these quite explosions of color. And you can see how you can start with a really quite an abstract base like this and pull it in and make it more kind of representational as you go. So you can start with, when you sort of see flowers and you look at them, you get this enormous burst of color and scent that you sort of see first of all, that you experience first, and then the structure and the sort of detail comes afterwards. So you can sort of start with quite, as long as you can sort of see the flower as kind of its parts of areas of color and form, you can sort of get those roughly down in your paint and then start building on the detail on top of what you've got. And it actually doesn't look, even if it's not being totally representational, it starts to really get the feel of the flower quite sort of quickly. Right, so where I've got these stems coming down here, I want to add a bit of detail to those to make them into more stems. I would probably, if I was doing this sort of completely on my own, I would kind of get all this light work done on these flowers first and then start working on, but I want to sort of show you how I would tackle this bit next, and then we'll go back and we'll get onto these sort of ones here and the sort of bluer ones up here. So with here, I'm going to go to my black pen again, because I'm kind of like keeping the stem. I want to keep the stems being more monochrome, and this area here eventually I would sort of work in some more monochrome lines, because I think it's important to, when you're doing an abstract like this, to sort of set yourself up with not exactly rules, but as you know, as sort of a rhythm, a pattern. So I want to make these flowers really vibrant. So to do that, I'm going to sort of desaturate the background image to make it sort of darker and more black and white, and then these should hopefully really pop against it. So where I've got these sort of stem dribbles coming down, I'm going to just start doing some edging of sort of like black line work just behind them, as if they're sort of indicating as if there's maybe a seed head or something happening behind there. And then I can sort of do, what I quite like doing is sometimes doing like an outline coming down, but making it slightly, because it's sort of furry or spiky or sort of, you know, just, so I'm just following that line down just with some little tiny black work details just either side to make it look like it's got a surface to it. And I'm sort of following the shape pretty much of the paint dribble without being too you know, and when if I get bored of doing that, I can then just go down and outline that sort of shape. But I just want to start giving these some sort of structure, and these are going to be the sort of stems in front. They're going to be the ones that are the most dominant, so I'm going to carry down. So like where I've got here, I want to make sure that I can see the difference between the petal and the head of the stem, so they're not we can see one standing out from the other. So I'm just going to create the kind of feel of some sort of seed head or bud again by just bringing a little sort of form. And it doesn't matter that you can see the red coming through it. It just makes this look again sort of quite translucent and dry. And I do like collecting pictures of seeds and flower heads. Sort of, they're lovely in their prime, but they're really interesting when they fade and change. Oh, there's somebody at the door. I'm just going to shout for my lodger and see if he's awake. Hold on. I'm so sorry, he's asleep. I'm gonna have to run downstairs and let in whoever's at the door. I'm so sorry about this. I'll be back in 1 second. Sorry about that. Teenage daughter returning from school without a key. They have a half day on Wednesday, so I couldn't leave from the doorstep, I'm afraid. People look give that a dim, look dimly on that if you do that sort of thing. So I'm just adding a few little circle details in which I could use to build up that. And then I just want to bring the stem down. So I can give that a nice strength and sort of structure. And I've got here a sort of lovely incidental dribble that happened when the hairdryer hit a sort of dribble of paint, but I'm going to make that work and I'm going to outline that. So that's going to become, sorry, excuse this like out of breathness, it's running down the stairs. So I've got this sort of, I'm going to give that a lot more form and substance by picking that out and drawing that down. So you can see why I want lots of dribbles on this, because they're all going to become the sort of massive stems. And eventually I would start adding in some more of these kind of quite stark black sort of stems and trails. And I might add sort of sections that I can then do some line work into, keeping this quite sort of monochrome and dark. I know that shape up top looks really strange, but when I've got, what I would do with that would then be to come back and again use some line work on it to make it more like the sort of a dried up bit of leaf or something, and curling through the shape of the stem, just sort of bringing that round so it becomes something more sort of structural, and I can bring more sort of detail. And then I've got a little one here, look, again sort of coming off there, so let's make that into something. Let's give it and see where that wants to grow down. And my aim would be to start drawing loads of these dark sort of or monochrome stems twisting down, and then I can start adding some leaf shapes in to sort of add to that, because you kind of get this, although I know a lot of stems tend to be green and you get a sort of massive greenness, I think it actually works quite well seeing it as being this sort of massive line work, because it becomes a really nice foil to the colour and the translucency of the petals on top. And you know, I would keep on building all this up so you get some real areas of darkness coming through. So again, I can just use the same lines, but just by sort of twisting them up the shape, they start to give that dried leaf kind of form and give it sort of structure, so it starts to look more like it's, you know, more like a twisted sort of dead leaf than just sort of a shape. And then I can come back and add some texture into the stems, so when they come in behind the flowers they start to sort of disappear, and then, you know, we can start building some more up, kind of coming all through this space, getting some nice thick stems that I can then decorate and add some black line work to, and sort of leaf forms coming up through these. So they're just still very simple shapes, but they're using a similar kind of quality of line as to what you're using in the flowers, but by using them in this sort of dark pens or the black pens, it just gives it that different contrasting feel to the colours. And again, you can see, but when you bring the lines close together, they start to create areas of shadow which give a lovely kind of form and rhythm. And then you can kind of turn directions and get those lines to work up through the space just by echoing what's gone before and sort of pushing them up in different ways. And they start to help describe shape and form as well as sort of translucency. And I can build them up into the leaf shape. And up they go. And you can start getting all sorts of pattern. You know, you can do stripes, you can do chevrons, you can make the stems become more pattern based and less representational, or you can sort of stick to being quite sort of representation. You might want to put like a sort of seed head. I quite like doing strange abstract seed heads. I'll just do one before we go back to the flower. So you kind of just do like a nice round globe shape and then give it a sort of some sort of joining bit where it's attached to a stem, and pull those through. And then to give that sort of a bit more form, again, just using your lines, but just swinging them out into curves. So as they come around that way, they're sort of all heading towards the left, and then they come back to the center and straighten up and move around. So they're going the other way now to kind of give it that kind, and that becomes like a sort of structural feel, and you get the same sort of effect just by taking your lines, curving them on these little sections here to kind of give them, use the lines to describe form as well as just sort of fill in pattern. So you can see that's giving that sort of, we're going to have, eventually I'll have more and more of these sort of intertwining stems in this sort of monochrome. So I'm going to come back now to, let's have a look. Let's see if I can get my camera to stretch up. Oh. And we can look at some of these bluey ones to see how the colour sort of works with the sort of more bluey toned colours. So you've got all these greens and blues up here. So I'm going to do the same sort of thing. I want to create a sort of very greeny kind of flower. Well, obviously green because it's in green paint, but on this green one here, I've got a pale section sort of around here of where it's a bit lighter. So I'm going to imagine that it's a slightly turned away from me. So I'm not looking at it front on. So I'm going to decide this is my kind of center in here. And I'm going to see it as a kind of mound to begin with from the side, and just sort of cluster some dark work into that. So imagining that I'm seeing it from the side on, so it's like a sort of bun or a kind of pincushion, just so you get that half a sort of shape like that. And then I can switch to some green pen. You could just as well use blue on, blue and greens work really nicely together. Don't believe that blue and green should never be seen, they should always be seen. So again, I'm going to start by, I'm going to add a bit of white onto my edge there. I'm just going to define that border between the two sort of flowers coming round in that sort of green. I'm not going to worry about that sort of rather crazy bit disappearing off there. I'll find a reason for that to exist later. But then come round, and that's sort of given me that sort of shape. And then I've got this hillock of sort of green here. So that's going to be where one petal kind of comes up and then it's going to come down again like that. So you've got that sort of petal section there. And then I'm going to have another one kind of coming out through there. And there's a little bit of a darker center there. So I can kind of change that sort of form there. So when I do these lines, these ones are going to come over the top, as it were, and down the hill as if they're coming. They're not going to cluster together right at the center because you're not quite able to see the whole of the center there. So they're going to come a bit more widely spread like this, sort of coming over, spreading down over that kind of area. If you do some widely spaced ones first, you can always come back and add some tighter ones in later. Then these ones are all going to be kind of disappearing into that section there. And this will start to help give that some form and a slight difference. So you can sort of see where the two different petals come. And again, you're only going to see this, you might see something different shape-wise with what you've got. So you just kind of have to decide. It's basically the same method, but just where I got that dark look, I can put a wobble in and sort of get that, then repeat that through there, kind of to give that form, to give that, to continue to exaggerate that kind of shape, to give it kind of structure. And so from that sort of quite amorphous green blob, we're getting something now that has much more form. And I can see here in mine, there's like a sort of darker green, and then I've got a paler green here. So I want to get my lines closer together on the darker section to kind of enhance that shadow kind of feel, but then keep them wider on the open section, which is sort of further towards the outside of the flower, which is why it's useful to kind of paint these thinking about having more paint and darker paint in the middle of all of these shapes, and then have lighter, less paint around the edges, and it'll help you give that kind of a feel. And if I want to get this to look darker, but I don't want to darken up this area, you can take some lines on the halfway point and just bring them through into the center, and they will start to add an extra sense of shadow, still following those form lines, but you'll start to add in some extra tone up to that sort of center point, and then bring them out and round. So that's sort of given, again, that sort of enhancing that kind of form that I've got on that shape there. and making it look more. And this edge here, sort of, I'm going to, because it's sort of getting dark, I'm just going to put a few just little short lines, but that just starts to give that, to allow this bit to stay lighter, but to give a bit of sort of form. And I think I could do with some slightly more darkness up in this end here, and just bring some lines through there, just to again give that sort of a shape to kind of push it back. So that green shape has now gone from being, you know, a very big sort of blob into something with quite a nice lot of form. Now this one here, this has got loads of potential form, hasn't it? It's got a really strong center, so I'm definitely going to give it a really nice big center. I want to follow that edge of this sort of pink. It's going to have a big sort of dark center eye. So I've got that outside of it there. So I'm then just going to define an area and go, right, yeah, that's the rest of it. That's going to come in around there. So now I've got to have this lovely big center in here. I will try and scan this and get, I did do a scan of my one from last week, but I just didn't remember to show you. But I will try and remember to show you, because you can see sort of like the intensity of the color. That I think it's quite hard to see through the webcam, but it's much stronger when it's seen in real life. So I'm going to, again, just putting some, because this is front on, I can use some shapes that are front on to me, kind of coming quite out like a sort of traditional kind of daisy flower, but just by using all sorts of thin, strange sort of raggedy lines, it gives it this sort of nice dark center. And I'm going to put some curved lines coming into that center. So again, thinking about it, if I'm looking at front on, it's kind of like looking down top of a currant bun. So you've got that kind of bun feel of them working round. And the more lines, again, I put in, the darker that's going to get, and the more intense that shadow kind of feel is. And then again, from here, I want to get some really close together lines kind of coming in, because I want all this to be a really dark center. So it's very satisfying and sort of rich looking. And the more lines of these lines I sort of packing, spreading out from the center, and they become shadow, and they become tone and texture. And move these round. All the way round. So that's becoming quite a dark, intense moment. And then I'm going to use paler pink colours to define the petals kind of going out, or certainly at least a magenta-y kind of pen. So let's bring those round. And that's given me, I think I want to get that darker. I can darken out the centre. I can go back and do more kind of lines. If you go around things again, it gives them an echo. It gives them a sort of more intense, smoky sort of feel. So I've got this really dark centre inside that flower. So then I'm going to use, this is one of my oft lauded gel pens. This is a nice one with a bit of glitter into it, because, you know, why not? So again, just the same process, deciding where the edge of my flower is going to come, and following that edge of paint that I've created. And you can see how it doesn't almost matter what your blobs of paint are up to. They're going to give you the lines, and the sort of way that you treat them will give you, at the end of it, something that really has a feel like sort of flowers and poppy petals. So that's just defined my shape there. I've obviously got a very strong line here, so that's going to be a petal line coming here. And this is quite nice, because this is a slightly paler color than the red here, so you've got that contrast of it being on top. I'm just going to decide that that's a sort of petal boundary here, and again along that pink line there, and bring the paint line through there. And then with I've got these sort of very strong paint marks here, so I'm going to start working around those and focusing my lines. And this is really cool, this pen, because it kind of looks, it's got metallic edge to it, which I don't know if it'll come across on the camera, but so it does catch the light and gleam, which is endlessly fascinating. And it kind of looks dark on the dark and light on the light, dark on the light and then light on the dark. I mean, get the right way around, which is quite a cool effect. So I'm going to bring those lines across here. Again, just trying to sort of say, well, this is going to find my nice wobbly pattern, and then following it, repeating it across the flower. So come round and and remember, because you're overlapping here, you've got 2 flower heads. So this orange, the first red one that you did is kind of on top. So we're going to keep making sure that our lines on the second one always stop at the border of that flower, because it can't, it's covering it, so you're not going to see through it. So hopefully that will give it kind of, you know, that this, in the order of preference, as it were, this one's on top. That's what I'm trying to say, just to keep that reality around the perspective kind of going. So I'm just going to fill a few more of those in and then come around into this section. And to start with, I'm just going to follow the line through and round the edge of those shapes. And I can sort of I might bring a line and sort of just go around those shapes so they become almost like a pattern on the petals, or a kind of mark. Just seeing how that looks. I think that looks quite interesting. And bring some line work in between. You can see it's a thicker pen line than some of the fine lines, because it works out at about a 0.4, but it's still, I don't think it looks too heavy because it's a lighter colour. And then fill in all the way across this section. And then I've got these sort of empty bits here. So this one, again, coming down towards the centre and getting those lines to define those petals. But the lighter the colour you use, the lines will still be there, but their impact will be more subtle. So that can work too in different ways, but this is starting to have quite a really soft sort of feel. If you want to get the impression that one of these petals is sort of curling up, like sometimes you get the end will curl back round on itself. If you see this sort of line here, if you imagine that as being in fact the base of a curl, and then you take, and I've got a nice area of paint, look, that's just coming through there. So if I do that sort of shape like that, and then the line, instead of going to that end here, I'm going to take them from here and define that first with some lines going round. And then you've got to imagine that these lines are going to sort of come from underneath and then come back round. If they don't quite meet themselves, but just sort of come round sort of in between, that gives it a more sort of realistic feel, or kind of, you get that perspective of it sort of like, so you imagine that line's flipping around and coming back up on itself. It just gives you that, because you can't quite see what happens at that bit, and it just gives that feel as if that leaf, that petal edge has turned itself over a little bit. And that's quite a cool trick to kind of pull off. And then I can put a few more of my little half lines just coming up under that, because that curl of petal would have cast a little bit of shadow onto the leaf above, and it just sort of helps give that illusion of it being a curled up leaf as opposed to a completely flat leaf. So that's sort of that larger one there. I don't know if you can, if I can get the camera to pick up the metallic shine of that. I'm not sure if it will by coming close and just sort of move it around. I don't know if you can see it. If I put a light on, maybe that'll help. No, maybe not. Oh, well, I was just trying to show that it's actually got a metallic sort of gleam to it, which is quite attractive. And as I keep saying, why should kids have all the fun pens? Why can't we have fun pens? And we can have fun pens because we are grown-ups. And we deserve fun things too. Right, and then I've got this lovely one here with this sort of radiant of sort of green, of blue on top of purple there. So again, I'm going to put a dark centre into that. What's catching my eye is I've got this sort of bulge of lighter colour kind of here. So I want to put my dark centre kind of around this sort of area at a slight angle, but not quite as angled as the green one maybe. And just bring those up and round and move all these sort of, just fill this area with lovely dark swirly sort of shapes. I want to get it really sort of smoky looking and bring it on top. And of course, you know, if you're doing this with just a set of black pens and you don't want it to be too heavy, choose the finest pen that you've got to do the line work, and it will automatically be lighter looking and then you can go into the heavier pens for some other colors, and it'll give you that kind of differentiation between the two. That's why they make them in different widths, so you can get a different strength to your line, and that gives you a darker line or a lighter line. So just by packing in a sort of little center like that. And then I'm going to switch to blue pen on this one. And where I mentioned that sort of line again, I'm going to just sort of see if I can define over that hill of kind of lighter paint. So I've got that leaf petal kind of bulging out that way. And then this edge here, remember how I did this turned back edge here? I'm going to do something similar here. So I'm going to follow those blue marks as if they were a turned in edge, so that this is actually the edge of the flower on this one, as well, the edge of the petals at least, as if it's kind of more like a cup kind of feel. And then that can come round and kind of open out like that. Let me just move my camera a little bit so we can get more in line with this one. Come move over, that's it, that's better. And then I can again have a sort of edge turning up, so all the way around this has got an edge that's turning round to make this slightly different shape. And then I've got the back end of the flower, and that's where the curve of where it's disappearing round would be. Coming under that edge there and bring that round. And then inside that you've got the division of the petals still, so I'd have a petal coming in sort of that way and then one coming in that way. Because I stop it at where that curved line edge, it gives you that feel of it being inside and outside, just in the same sort of way as we did before, but I'm just taking it to like a bit further on. So where I've got all this curled round outside, I'm going to do lines coming across, following those blue shapes, but then disappearing around the back like that. So they start to become the sort of sections of the flower as it moves in different surfaces. And coming over the top and round. And there, just as it's sort of disappearing off, you can just add some more kind of coming this way. And because we're sort of changing the direction, we've now got that feel of this being like a sort of cup of folding over, and these ones are going to come folding down and down towards that center. And they've got that movement as if it's sort of like dropping down on itself. There we go. And then that can sort of come round. And then this little corner here, this one is sort of curling up. So my line's going to come from underneath and up like that. And they can sort of give that feeling again of that sort of edge coming up like we did in that first flower. And you can sort of get that whole kind of feel. And then the inside ones, they're going to be, again, doing their path from that inside space and coming along. And they don't, in fact, you should try and avoid them meeting up with any of the lines that are coming over the top from the outside, because it tends to make them, it sort of destroys the illusion a bit. So make sure they sort of disappear under that turned up edge. And there we go. And that's starting to kind of really give that nice form. If you think about it in terms of where the light and shade would come, you'd probably get more light on this top section because the light's coming from above. So I would add some line work into that edge here and darken that down a bit by putting some more lines coming back from that edge. And that will kind of help to give that, again, that sort of curled over feel. Okay, so and then same with this one here, I would just slightly do, and then maybe under here, slightly more lines coming into that sort of edge to give a kind of feel of shadow. But that's then, if I come back, let's pull the camera back a bit, you can see how that's given that flower a different kind of form. You've still got this area of paint coming through, which we've just kind of worked around. It doesn't distract from the shape that we've created, but it just shows you how you kind of pick out the bits that you want to work for you and ignore the bits that aren't really working and work around them. So with the sort of black stem work, if I bring a little bit more of that in, again, I would bring that into all this kind of area through here. So I would get some stems kind of coming down, and I haven't paint drawn to find that edge yet, but it would come down, it would stop around this sort of petal edge, and I'd bring some more of these down, and I want to get quite a lot of these building up. So I've got a lovely red streak here, so that can become a sort of more angular stem kind of coming down into disappearing off behind this flower. And then I would sort of keep bringing line work into these to build up this sort of monochrome backdrop that I want to get between all these flowers, so that I'm getting contrast between them. And if I get one sort of coming on this side, I want to take it up and imagine that it's coming up through this side as well. So I've got one going to come up here, and this one is going to come back over here. Like that. So I kind of get the sense of them traveling along behind each other. And I've got this sort of random green here, so let's turn that into a piece of some sort of twiggy like thing that's doing a thing that's going up over here. I mean, it's semi-abstract, isn't it? So it doesn't have to be all, it doesn't have to make sense. And I can just bring that across the face of that one to give it in a different kind of perspective. And let's bring some more of these. I've got one sort of little one that's just starting under there, and that's going to come through and up. And there we go, that's just disappearing up behind that leaf. So it's just sort of chasing all these areas and getting some more of these stems into play, because they start to give a contrast to the colours, and they start to give a backdrop. But they don't have to be complicated, they're just lines kind of coming down. And the closer, again, you pack them together, the darker their impact's going to be. And the more I can work them in like that. So as they come closer together, they have more shadow, they have more impact. And we can take another one. Let's get another one going down under here. And they don't have to make total sense. They don't have to be completely representational, but they just give this impression of stems and things growing and intertwining. And they basically there to act as a kind of black and white foil to the colours that we've got happening in the flower heads around us. So it's about 2:15, so we've got about 1/4 of an hour to go, or just around about. So what would people like me to do next? Should I do this sort of big flower in here? Should I have a look at that blue section at the top? What do you think you'd like me to go through that would help you with your own paintings going on? Anybody want to make a suggestion?
Blue section at the top would be helpful.
Blue section at the top, fantastic. Right, okay, so
I agree. I'd like to see what you do with that, because out of all of the shapes, that's probably the most abstract of all of them. So
it is the most abstract, isn't it?
It would
quite
be good to see what you do with it.
right.
It looks
Okay,
like it could almost be 2 flowers.
I was going to say I think it's 2 flowers. I think we've got a sort of almost like a sideways one maybe happening here, and then this one is sort of like in the way that this orange one is sort of face on but further back. I think that's going to happen here. So let's see if we can pick out something happening with this as a sideways one. So I'm going to start by defining my petal edges before I do my center, because it's quite high up. I'm just wondering, I don't think I can I can in theory drop my workbench down, but it's a bit tricky. So I'm going to see if I can just move it down so I can get a better camera angle on it. It's a bit balancy. I'm sort of balancing it on the edge of my table. So if I forget, if I lose constant, if I get too absorbed, I might forget and drop this onto my toe, but we'll try not to do that. Right, whoops. Okay, now you can see where this is going to be a balancing act. Right, so I've also managed to trap my headphone lead against it. Okay, so I'm hoping that that will just about stay put for this session. Is it gonna? Hang on, I'm just going to do a quick adjust of something. And Oh, on the other side, 2 of everything, which I can't see what I'm doing. Oh, come here. Right, I think that's giving me a bit more table I can lean against. Okay. If I let go, there's a big scream. It's because I've dropped this on my foot. Right, go on, sit. I need to start. Oh, right. Okay, I'm going to hold it with one hand. Okay, so I'm going to take the pen lids off one-handed. And let's bring that camera in a bit closer. Okay, I think we can see what's going on a bit better. So I'm going to start by trying to imagine this as being a kind of side-on flower. So this bit here I can see as being like a sort of a calyx underneath, you know, that sort of where the bud is going to come from. So that's going to be a sort of bud shape. Oh, and then I think I'm going to come, this is going to be an edge of a petal down here. And then I'm going to take that across there to see that's going to be an edge sort of through there, quite abstract. But then I want to get a sort of curl feel. So it's going to come, I'm going to get a top edge kind of coming across there. Then there's a petal going to be coming out sort of from round here and bringing that edge up round kind of into there. And yep, I can see that can come down. I haven't drawn my centrum. It's going to be a center kind of down there. That's starting to look like, can we sort of see the direction we're going in? If I put some more detail into this, as it were, sort of calyx or bud, and I've got a nice line to follow there, look, to create that into. I can bring some of these lines of twisting up, and then that becomes a stem going away down into the sort of depths there. And then if I can get a black pen, just bear with me because I'm taking the lid off one-handed. Right, there we go. So then my center is going to come in somewhere around. So I'm just going to see a little bit of it just sort of behind there. And then I can fill that in with sort of texture to give that, that's the center. But I'm just seeing it sort of peeking out from behind that, the edge of that sort of petal. So then I can bring some sprays up from that. So that's sort of, it's very much a side view, again, as if we're seeing it from right far across. And then let's darken that edge to give that some real standing out capacity, because that's going to help that petal stand out there. So we're seeing how that's sort of developing. And then when I start getting the line work in, this is a petal curving out this way, I'm seeing this as. So I can bring my lines kind of curving out and down like that. And then this side, we're kind of coming up and over and like that. So up and over, coming over and round that. And then this side is going to come down and open out into that edge. And this edge is going to be a bit darker. So that's sort of giving us that sideways view now of a flower just by seeing how those can flow together. So I think that definitely was good call to make for 2 flowers in that, because you can see how that's now the sort of sideways angle. I'm just going to put some slightly more lines in again just to get that shadow on that side, and I can just put a few more just again maybe on that side, keep that bit there as highlight though, but just sort of bring, so I can make that center darker and get this sort of edge to stand out. And then down here I can put some texture onto that bud, both to add tone and to get that leaf to sort of stand out. And then for the one behind, again, we can put a center almost anywhere we want really, but I think, can you see I've got this sort of slightly lighter area here that's like a little sort of cloud of lightness. so I'm going to put my center as if that's sort of slightly rising up next to it. So the center is going to come sort of in here. And that's it. I really want to get a green pen for this. I don't want to use the same blue pen because I want to get the difference between these two established. But now I've got to try and reach for one, and whilst not letting everything drop onto my toe. But I expect I'll manage. I'll be fine. So I'll get that center in. You can see how it's just starting to give that little sort of. It's like a little bed that it's sitting into, and oh, different green pen. Come here. Oh, no, not this one. I picked up this one is too yellowy green. I want a bluier green than that for this one because it's got. I'm going to use that one. That's got more that sort of tonal relationship. So yeah, so I can bring some petal lines around there and define that edge. But remember, it's always behind this one because it's sort of further back. And it's helped to recede by being this sort of blue color. It becomes further behind, and then I can bring in a sort of petal edge like that. So those are kind of almost like cushioning that one inside. And then the ones at the back here, I've got to make them go kind of up and disappearing off behind up into that region of the flower. I want to make them darker there, sort of coming tighter into that section. And then over this bump here, they're going to kind of come over the crest of that hill and down into that sort of petal. I know that was sort of continuing, but I'm going to slightly ignore that and just keep that into that section so I can build more. If I do more line work over that, we can slightly pretend that that's not attached to that stem there that I've kind of started it off on. And I can get a bit more line and shadow in behind there and get some more darkness into all these sort of areas. Oh yes, bring these lines on here behind and down behind that and behind that again. So it's helping to push that perspective. And that's hopefully given you an idea of how we can fit those two in. So we've got the one, so that big space did indeed become the two flowers with one sort of, and I quite like the way we've now got this sort of, they're turning from pointing this one sort of front on, and then we've got this quite nice rhythm of them moving with it, that sort of facing that way, then facing 3/4 and then facing almost all the way. There's a nice sort of movement between those three areas there, which we've sort of, I don't know if we meant to do that or if we've just worked on it subconsciously and that's how it's turned out. But if anyone asks, then that's obviously a really strong compositional element that we decided to do for loads of academically good artistic reasons, as opposed to just being how it turned out and doesn't that look nice. I think either way is valid. I think serendipitous discoveries in your artwork are what it's all about. So I think that's got a really nice sort of rhythm coming through those there. I will try and get it back onto a stand now so we can sort of see how it's all progressing together. Whoops, with a loud crash. We'll just keep swimming. This is where I definitely need a third arm. I've often thought that I really need to be like the goddess Shiva with all her multitude of arms. I think that was definitely reflecting of a female experience, that you have to have, 8 arms so you can get everything done at once, particularly when you become a parent and have to hold down a job. Right, okay, so if I then bring my camera back, I think you can see I think it's nice to have a look and see how we've still got these sort of, I will work in these areas, but you can see how we've come from a very sort of abstract kind of fluid base, but we've managed to give them real kind of like form and shape just by looking at what we've got going on and then trying to see those shapes in them and being true to that kind of shape environment, as it were. I can see another one here where I can do a really big sort of centre. I've got one up the top there just to do, and then I will work through this sort of black and white background and get more of these in so that these kind of really pop. I definitely want to get some of this black and white happening in these little white spaces behind here. I don't want to forget about those, because if I'm saying that this is kind of background or it stems, I want to bring that through the whole piece. So I need to see little hints of it here just to establish this as being a definite whole that you're sort of seeing through. But I hope what you've seen as well is compositionally, you've still got this sort of arc of orange, which then leaps across, our eye leaps across to the sort of area up here. And then we've got this complementary kind of swerve or curve of the blue kind of colours coming through. So overall, I hope it doesn't look too, it's not too organized look. It doesn't look like, you know, plonk, 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 but it still has a kind of natural feel. But at the same time, there is a thought process behind where we've placed things that allows the eye to kind of come round and sort of experience all these sort of areas. And this sort of illustrative quality of having these sort of black and white lines around here, again, acts as a really nice foil to all these colours. So there we go. So I think I'm going to stop and see how you've all got on with this exercise now. So I'm going to switch back to my face camera. I'm going to stop the recording before I do that, because you might not want to share and you might not want to have the discussion sort of logged on the recording. So I'm going to stop that